What's up, everybody, and welcome back for our second part of our tier list. I think part one I was feeling pretty good about, but there's actually a couple changes since doing a little bit more laddering recently, and just trying to climb my way back towards top 20, which has taken a little bit of time. Although I still feel like kind of my read on things has been correct, I did want to talk about a couple changes to the list, and thank you Beyond Bounds for sending me the format so I can have all the planeswalkers on there. And I was just wrapping up trying to update a Sorin deck list before we got in here. So if we hop over to our handy dandy Magic Spellslingers calculator here. So, obviously we finally got all the planeswalkers up here because I had that weird thing for last video. And I just, like, there's a category for, like, unranked, which I guess would be, like, the worst of the worst. But I just kind of moved everything up because, as I've said before, this game is all about matchups. And so, like, let's take an example. Still think Nissa is one of the strongest, if not the strongest deck, right? Versatile, consistent, strong. Honestly, there have been games where Gideon or Drizzt, right, if they snowball properly, it's really, really hard to answer from Nissa's perspective. Now, I don't know that I would say it's like necessarily a bad matchup for Nissa, but it's not. I think at times it's not very good. I would say Gideon and Yanling with Fair Fight and Paragon of Balance and Aura of Courage, all of that, they have the ability to win. Same with Kaya, right? The sort of go wide, do as much damage as possible early. If you don't hit your lava wave, it's over. So I just wanted to kind of say that because, yes, I'm putting these planeswalkers, in like B tier, or even Sorin and Yanling here down in C. But it's all about matchups. Like certain cards or abilities line up with other ones. So again, I want to kind of reinforce, like, even if from the data we would say a planeswalker doesn't do well against the field, if you only saw Nissas, I wouldn't fault you for playing go wide aggressive low curve strategies like the ones we just talked about. So it's all really based on context. So also you're going to see that I switched something in this top row. Now, since I've been playing plenty of Garruk, and really do feel like it's just a nice change from having played a bunch of games of Nissa. I'll probably return to Nissa at some point. Garruk's games also tend to be a little bit quicker, so that's kind of a nice thing. Like, it still feels like it can go late, or be aggressive, and also just the games aren't that long. So as I've been playing a lot of Garruk, the matchup that stands out as one of the worst is Teferi. So the more I thought about it, I was like, okay, Teferi generally has decent tools to deal with aggro, and has, some reasonable tools to deal with mid-range. I think I wanted to bump Teferi up a little bit over Liliana because I think Teferi is a bit more consistent than Liliana is. And if Teferi has a good matchup against Garruk, which I think is generally the case, then Teferi should be higher up on the tier list because Teferi being able to address what Garruk is doing when A, I think it's a pretty popular planeswalker, and B, I think that it just does have like a 60-40 or maybe a little bit even better matchup against Garruk. I think that Teferi can start to answer, like, if folks tend to pick him up a little bit more, can start to answer decks like Garruk a little bit more. So I kind of wanted to just shift that around for folks. Everything else, I think, is about the same. So, we're covering the last part of the tier list. Thank you for my little update here. And what I did was I went through my old deck lists, and I just kind of just wanted to see, like, would I tweak them from when I used to play them? Would things necessarily make them better? And I'm sure, like, other people who are, like old, diehard Angrath fans, Vivien, Ajani, like, I'm sure you all could probably tell me, Tim, this is the list that I'm using, and I think it's the best list for this planeswalker. So, I am putting the caution out there. I do not think that my deck lists are the best, but I want to give people a bit of a roadmap, and I would love for y'all to comment and be like, hey, this is my most winning Ajani build. This is my most winning Kaya build. because I'm definitely not a master deck builder, and we've got a huge community out there who have their favorite planeswalkers and put a lot of time into it. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So we'll start with Angrath and see what good old Angry Anki is bringing to the table. So I was looking at a list with Barbarian class, with some of these synergies with like the small artifacts and things like that. And while I do think that that's an option, I feel like I would rather play Angrath more of this mid-range. Mid-range is not the right term. I would say like just kind of general linear aggressive version. I'll share a piece of wisdom that actually Boss had shared with me the other day. When you think about even the starter decks, right, and what they're supposed to be doing, sometimes we try to build our deck around the passive of the planeswalker too much, right? Some planeswalkers require it. With Angrath, I don't think that's the case, right? +1/+0 is not this huge bump. Of course, it's nice to get it when you can. If you can enable it most of the time, obviously that's going to be good. But it's not something you have to necessarily warp your deck to do. And if you are, you want to think about, is the payoff worth it? So that's just a little bit of my, or Boss's thought process, and I sort of wanted to echo that, because I think I'd rather just play a straight-up kind of aggro value version. I think that Emberspawn Crags is the land that we should be playing. It can bring out a lot of pressure, whether you're playing 3/1 Crags or 2/1 Crags. I think it is the card advantage that you want. And the reason we're starting with Angrath at the top of C tier is that, right, or B tier? Sorry, B tier. I had to remind myself. So there's so many planeswalkers. Is I still have always felt that he is a formidable aggro option. I think that aggro has gotten a bit worse since, Garrett came into the game. I think he does give aggro quite a hard time. And I would say when I played Garrick against Angrath, it feels like a pretty good matchup for Garrick. But again, like, you're thinking about all of the matchups, right? And I still think Angrath can do quite a lot of work. So you've got your early 1-drop package. You've got your 2-drop kind of value or creatures that push your damage through, right? Like Shortcutter. You've got Rage Runner. You've got Yenogu, which can kind of set up these really explosive turns. And sometimes when you don't answer this thing immediately, it just kind of runs away with the game. And then Takedown, from anyone who's been playing Davriel, when you cast this for 1 mana, it feels real good. But I think Takedown, again, still very good. If the strongest deck in the format is Nissa running Jiraga Druid, having Takedown as an answer, very, very important, in my opinion. Join the family I've generally just liked in this sort of deck, right? You're trying to sneak through that damage. As we've discussed, kind of a mixture of like almost Gideon and Chandra, right? You're playing creatures and deploying threats, but you're trying to like sneak this damage through to really have the biggest impact. And then you've got, value creatures like Death Raider, and Stormkirk Mentor, right? Like sometimes that on a Zozu can be kind of backbreaking. Same with Yenogu. And even same with Angrath Death Raiders. And although I don't love this creature all the time, when you play it as a 5/3 sneak, which is not that hard to do in the deck, and then, you give something else sneak that's kind of impactful, I think that it is one of the better kind of linear aggressive strategies you can have in the late game. So I've generally liked it. And then, of course, Zozu as just a haste threat. And I think this deck is totally serviceable. And I think if you just like Angrath, I mean, this is kind of the shell that I would be looking at. I'm sure there are tweaks that you can make. I think into Garrick it's tough. I think you can definitely beat Davriel. And I think you can definitely beat Nissa, although it's a little harder. It just really depends on how your draw goes. And then I think against other aggressive decks, you can outmuscle them. Against control decks, you can really just put the pedal to the metal and grind them down. So I think that Angrath is still a viable aggro option and just has access to some really impactful cards, and that's kind of why. And I feel like he's resilient to sweepers as well because of the card advantage that he has. And as we know, black has become a very, very powerful sort of, when we think about how much we're seeing Death Shadow and other things like that, maybe this deck should be running Death Shadow, right? Obviously, being able to play Stormkirk Mentor and Death Shadow at, which we'll talk about later with Sorin, um, maybe that's the way. I haven't really looked too hard at this list, and I think you could play Detonator if you want to try and get there. You do have a relatively high life total, um, so it might just take a little bit of time to really tweak. But I think that Angrath is still able to hang with the big dogs, so to speak. So that's my thoughts on Angrath. So we got Vivien, which I think is just sort of the forgotten mid range deck, as we've just we've gotten Garrick, we've gotten different builds of Davriel. Domri has kind of, in a lot of ways, edged out Vivien, depending on how much you've played with those planeswalkers. But I do think that Vivien, just as always, has had the ability to be flexible, right? Sort of like Nissa. I do like the fact that Mistraven plays very well right now. I think Momir is a very efficient card into the meta right now. I think Tracker tends to be very good, especially when you've got Beefeater Tarmogoyfs. You've got access to Grudge Match early, which is important. And Ulrich, which is one of my favorite 5-drops, just is a great card. So I think, Vivien can definitely hang, and I think does pretty well into plenty of matchups. Most of them would be aggro, but she super struggles with Teferi, and in my opinion, I think is kind of a bit of a worse Garrick. I mean, they're doing different things, right? But I think Garrick, just on raw power level, is higher. So, there's not too much to say about this. This is a build that Boss has been working on for a while. I think I maybe tweaked it a tiny bit. But you're playing good creatures, you're playing value creatures. You could probably tweak it even more to have a little bit better matchups or percents in different matchups. And I think the access to different colored creatures, giving you access to stuff like Mistraven, can be a really, really impactful thing. And maybe this deck should also be playing Pixie Trickster. Maybe splitting it 1-1 with Mistraven or something like that, because I think Pixie Trickster is a great card right now. So I think that's really Vivien, and I think she definitely deserves a good bit of respect and should be played. And when we're thinking about some of these last couple of mid-range decks, I sort of I struggle with like Ajani and Serra and sort of Drizzt, but I think the way I've thought about it and when I've played against it, like Ajani can put away some games and can be, pretty potent. And I don't think that my list is the best, but what I've liked about this list is that it can be very explosive. When you do have an early skirmisher, you're able to buff it up and keep it alive, and then, potentially in the late game, copy it with Kingcaller, or if we wanted to play the 5 mana, give something +3/+3, I think that's good too. I wanted to experiment even just with one Thwack, because in my mind, what Ajani lacks is like reliable, unconditional removal that's good, right? You've got Grudge Match, which is great, and you've got Tracker, which I think is also great. I don't think you want to be playing Path to Exile. And I don't think you really want to be playing Blindside that much. Like, I'm not really a huge fan of that card. Maybe I'm a little bit more down on it. But Thwack taking out 2 threats for a pivotal turn, I think is maybe worth considering. When I was sitting down just looking at the build, I just was like, well, how can you make sure that you're able to make their best creatures irrelevant and continue to push damage and have it be a really helpful card? And I think Thwack on certain turns might actually do that. So again, take my deck building with a grain of salt. But I think this sort of version is definitely worth considering. And I think can do some really powerful stuff. I think the Yak version can be good, but it plays too many dead cards. So when you don't draw, I just don't think the deck's consistent. I feel like this deck is a bit more consistent. And you could run the Yak package and play more than Haunt, but I think I'd rather just draw value creatures for my deck. Play Barreling Hippo, give everything trample, and just kind of beat my opponent down. I think that style can beat out aggro decks. It can beat out certain mid-range decks as well. I think that Ajani does have a decent game with certain draws, even against like control to really pressure them. So that's kind of my 2 cents, very briefly, on Ajani. And I think the thing that Serra has going against her right now is just that she's kind of hard to deck build. She's kind of hard to find a really consistent way of living in the early game and closing things out. And I think that let me just take a drink of water. I can feel the. I think that I do prefer her not as an aggro planeswalker. And honestly, I've been pretty happy with cards like Icing Death that can sometimes come down and surprise your opponent, and do quite a lot to change the state of the game. And I did switch around some cards recently, and I kind of like where this build is at. You've got your one kind of value one drop, right? And the rest are just, it's 2 and up. And, the main thing to note is Panharmonicon with Gold Knight Harbinger makes your Chroma lethal, most likely, when it attacks. Which I think, and Pan also does more than that, right? It can mimic Healer, it can mimic Serra's Disciple, right? Gets you an extra card. Same thing with Geist of Saint Traft, with Angel of Mercy, with Eminent Archangel. So Pan is not just like a dead card when you don't have Gold Knight. And, really padding your life total can be really hard to deal with, because if you're just sitting there and then just resolving some of these angels and then working towards Icing Death or a Chroma, it's going to be a problem for your opponent. I do think Serra's Judgment, with the fact that Death Shadow's in the format, is a good spell to be running. I think Immolating Glare, although it's pretty telegraphed when you have it, can be very, very powerful when people aren't playing around it. I think one Shrine of Valor is fine. You're investing 4 mana to make a 2/3, and then you basically get a free 4/4. So I feel like that's still just going to be good enough. And I think that the deck's still probably somewhat competitive. It's not going to be my go-to choice basically ever, because of how slow it can kind of be. But I think that she just has some good tools. Like Vindictive Shot's great, Immolating Glare is great, Watchwolf is the best 2-drop in the game, right? I think you get a bit outmuscled by Garruk, but also you can run Day of Judgment and not really get punished. You've got all these kind of value creatures that, give you some upfront value, and then you can Day of Judgment and reset the board. And I think Day of Judgment is good right now because of Death Shadow. So, I kind of wanted to give her a nod that I do think that she's, in the upper sort of B tier. So that's kind of my thoughts on Serra. And, as you know, I've been kind of grouping these 3 aggressive planeswalkers together, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I'll throw up the deck list briefly while we chat about them. And I do put these 3 planeswalkers still kind of in the same area, because they're doing similar things, right? Obviously, Gideon and Kaya are very similar in the sense that they want to go wide. Gideon wants to have enough creatures to attack with his, his actual, creature, and Kaya wants to complete missions. I still would run this version. I like Negate into some of what the format's doing. I think Fair Fight can be very powerful. I like Mana Constrictor, giving you a bit of value as well. I don't know if Blue Splash is the best splash, but I think for Gideon it's almost always been the best splash. This deck will get you Mythic. I'll tell you that right now. Will it get you high up into Mythic? Depends on your matchups. But if you're punishing slower mid-range decks or control decks, you can win those matchups. That's Gideon. Kaya, very similar in the sense that, and again, take my builds with a grain of salt. I haven't touched this one because generally I felt like it operated pretty well. You're just going wide, you're getting your creatures buffed with Hellmouth Cave, and you could play like Death Shadow and play, the black land that deals the damage and you get the 2/2s later on. That could be good. But I think I've just generally liked what this does. It does what it does well. which is going wide and having evasive threats. Is it powerful enough for what we're dealing with right now? I would say no. So that's kind of why I put Kaya there. But again, it's all about matchups. You're going to win the slower matchups. You're going to win against the clunky draws. You're going to win against the control decks for the most part. So that's why I would still count these in. And the Drizzt obviously operates... It's not what I meant to do. Obviously operates a little bit differently, because you're not necessarily going wide. But again, I do want to try Thwack. Maybe it's bad. But just in my mind, I was kind of trying to think of, what is a removal spell that is like Path to Exile in some sense, but is more value up front. And I think that's where I landed at with Thwack. Again, I don't think that this build is the end-all be-all, but when I was playing it a lot, I found it to be pretty good. And now that I'm thinking about this, I may try and throw up more decks on the channel. I haven't really been playing a ton these days just because things have been busy, and I haven't really been playing a variety of planeswalkers because, to be fair, I'm kind of playing what is, I feel, the best in the meta. But I do think that these decks are a lot of fun and that they can be competitive. And, I'm just going to kind of make a little note for myself that maybe we'll try and get some more, especially when Blitz is out, maybe, because then I won't lose rank. And it's not saying that I would lose on Mythic Ladder all the time if I played these decks, but, just for wanting to hit certain goals might be a little tough for me to do. But I'm going to try and maybe play a little bit more variety of Planeswalkers, because there are seasons where I played a ton of Drizzt, played a ton of Vivien, played a ton of Domri, as you guys know. Like, there are a lot of Planeswalkers that I've really put a lot of time into that, we don't see as much on the channel. So just a little note for myself. And then, right, to round out B, I still feel like I'd rather, this is kind of, again, how I approach this. If I was given the choice to play the two bottom tier of B, I'd pick Rao. I worked on a Jace deck just to kind of showcase what I felt like was a good Jace deck, but what I would do with Rao is, it's nothing crazy, but I think you would go School the Wizard for the card advantage. I think you could play one Young Pyromancer. I don't think it's the worst in the world. And then the rest of your deck kind of plays itself, and I split the difference. I was like, I don't think playing two Pyromancer is the right move, but I think, Ember Mage is, like, fine, as sort of like a value creature in the deck alongside Thing in the Ice and Magnum Opus. I think this version would do fine. I mean, you could play Lava Wave, you could play like a bigger kind of version, but I kind of like the idea of the deck into some of the Death Shadow decks when you get to play Unsummon, when you got Burn Throughs. I think Shock is very good into Garruk. And, Isochron Scepter can draft you some good stuff, and it just kind of plays itself in a lot of ways where if you curve out well, and you, like, stick a Thing in the Ice, or you stick a Mizium, and they're not able to deal with it, you can win the game. So, and I was thinking about Heat Shimmer for this deck, because when I've gotten to Heat Shimmer my Death Shadows, I'm like, this feels illegal. Heat Shimmer does cost one more, right, when you're not playing in a Davriel. But Heat Shimmer and a Magnum Opus, right, if you give it some sort of evasion, maybe I should consider that in the build. So, for you RAL players out there, definitely let me know what you've been doing and how you've been tweaking this. So I still think this is good. Rooftop Laboratory can be really, really backbreaking to close out the game as well. And the deck still feels not fast, but definitely not slow. So you've got a little bit more value. You're not going as quickly. But I still think that it's competitive. And you know me, I'm not a Jace player, I'm not really a control player in this game in general. But I did want to talk about a deck that I played against and found to be pretty good. So, I'm not going to talk too much about the blue cards. I'm going to go straight to the red splash, and here's why. Lava Wave, no explanation there. Obviously just a good sweeper to have. I played against a deck that ran 2 Blasphemous Act, 2 Pyroclasm, 2 Lava Wave. And I was like, this is pretty impressive. And then I think they ended up winning with a combination of like School of the Wizard and Mistraven, I think. which I think is probably enough. I actually tweaked it a little bit. Infernal Broker is a card that I've been thinking about in more decks. As certain decks have had these higher cost, more impactful cards, what Infernal Broker can do is really stick them with something that just is a strictly worst card in the deck, right? It's when it comes into play, for anyone who hasn't seen this, I wouldn't blame you. Discard the highest cost card in your opponent's hand, and then add a random card of the same type. So just for best case scenario, think about you're playing against Nissa, and you're out of Remands or Negates or whatever, and they've been sitting with like one card, two cards in their hand, and you just play Infernal Broker, and you hit their Primal Summoning, right? And you get to bin their Primal Summoning, and they get some other random thing. That could be really impactful. Also, Infernal Broker for one, after you've ultimated Jace, right? I mean, it is a 5-mana 6/6, so like your opponent does have to deal with it. And then I put a Snapcaster in for value, obviously running School of the Wizard as a way to close out the game, Figments to have efficient turns, Mist Raven because I just think it's good in the format. I don't have a second Blasphemous Act, but honestly, I might play these 4 sweepers. I don't think you need Pyroclasm. I think you have plenty of early game. But I think having access to some of these sweepers can just drain your opponent of resources. If I was going to play Jace, this is what I would play. I wouldn't play the blue-white Maniac version. I'm never going to play Maniac, I don't think. So, take what I say, lightly. But I think if I was forced to boot up a game of this is what I would be playing. So I just wanted to kind of share my thought process there. And I still think Jace can win quite a few games against mid-range if you have the right build and sort of the right curve. So then we come to C tier. Now, what I will say about Yanling is I think she is a good aggro option. It's possible that she belongs like here, but I think she needs a little bit of help to be more consistent to get there. So that's kind of why I put these in the bottom 3. And of course, it hasn't really changed from my last tier list video. That's because these planeswalkers need some love. So we'll see if in the updates, if we get an update patch soon, we'll see if maybe some of these decks can come alive. But I think, these are the bottom tier decks at the moment. So Yanling, again, I'm not going to talk about it too much because you guys have already seen this build. It's basically you're doing a Gideon impression, but you've got flyers. I will say having access to both Dungeon Geist and Pixie Trickster, not the worst thing in a Death Shadow meta, because they both deal with them fairly well. So I don't want to say that she's not able to address some of what these decks do, because she is. But what I will say is when you are playing your one power flying creatures, and then your Garruk opponent lands a Predator and wipes your entire board, it makes you think twice about playing this deck. So that's kind of my cautionary tale to Yanling folks out there. I do not think that this is the best Ashiok build. I'll be the first to say it, but I always really like this sort of cheaper style. I will say I've come up on Infest in the format recently. I think it's a good way of dealing with some of what Garrick's doing. Mist Raven, again, I think can be very, very impactful. I like running these kind of value 2-drops and really gumming up the board early. You've got access to Shell Game, and Flagrant Fail is really good unconditional removal, same with Change Teams. And then Master Possibilities just seem like a reasonable, top of your curve. You could run Arcanus. I just think it's a little costly when you're already like generating, cards from their deck and things like that. So, I kind of wanted to try this more value version. I think you should probably be running some of the other, at least one of the signature cards, besides Stag. And that's my big beef with Ashiok in general, right, is that these cards are just not good. I mean, I think Extract Fear is fine. I've honestly kind of gone back and forth on it myself. Stag, I think if it costs 3 mana and was a 3/5, or if you made it like a 5/6 for 4, would be a bit more impressive. And Saboteur is just not a card. There are 1-drops that are 3/3s now. This thing just cannot compete. It's not about putting a million nightmares in your opponent. It's really more about grinding them out. So, Saboteur doesn't really work, in my opinion. And I think Break a Leg is a really good early game answer, and I kind of liked some of the Winter Grip Mage Scorpion combo, where you can just chill something, right, and then doom it. I think that can be kind of nice, and you've got these value traps, and then you just steal some of their stuff, play what you're playing, and I think that playing School of the Wizard is just a fine win condition for you. So yeah, that's kind of not a good Ashiok list, I'm sure, but I have not put a ton of time into the Planeswalker because it just. Have I lost to Ashiok? As I've always said, yeah, I'll lose games to Ashiok. I actually lost a game as Garrick the other day. But it's few and far between because the deck is just really, really underpowered, in my opinion. So we arrive at Sorin. Alas, poor Sorin. Really, really struggling, I think. But there might be potential. I haven't really looked at this build in a while, but I added the Death Shadow, made sure it had Kothafed. And, you just kind of play it as an aggro build. You've got a couple pieces of early removal. You've got some value creatures. You've got Detonator. I feel like playing Westfall Abbey makes sense. There are probably better builds. But I also did think that, with the resurgence of some of these black cards and people are maybe evaluating them a little bit more accurately, maybe Sorin, can kind of do a Davriel impression, so to speak. And it wouldn't be that bad. And I've said it before, sometimes Sorin, if you go one drop or triple one drop by turn 2, and then, take down their thing, Sorin's Feast their thing, play a Reveler, play a Mentor, play a Duchess, you could just run over your opponent. It's very possible. So, it's not like Sorin can't win games. So, this is where we ended up. I'm pretty satisfied with this. I'm sure some of these Planeswalkers could move a tier up or tier down in this sort of range. I feel pretty good about the upper echelons here. And I will try and maybe put out a Q or a video, which we don't see a lot on my channel. Or maybe even an Angrath or a Vivien, even a Ajani, right? And sort of showcase some of these things. I'm not going to play Liliana. I've done a lot of Nahiri. Maybe I'll play a little Chandra, maybe couple things of Domri. We'll kind of see. But that's what I got for you today, folks. I hope it's helpful just kind of hearing some of my thoughts. Again, the game is really based on matchups. It's based on what you're seeing, what your card choices are, what you're teching for. So don't be disillusioned if your favorite Planeswalker is not doing so well right now. Maybe, go into the main MTG Spellslingers Discord and ask people for advice, or if you're in the LGS Discord, which I'm a part of, we got plenty of people streaming games, doing a coaching thing tonight. We got a lot going on over there, so there's plenty of ways of really tapping into the community, the hive mind, and saying, okay, if I'm gonna play this deck, even if I know it's maybe not the best, what would optimize it? And I think you'll find that you'll find some passionate people. So that's where we're ending up, and I'm looking forward to just bringing some more content to you guys. It's been a busy week for me, and definitely been a little bit more stressed and tired, but we're here, and I'm excited to get this video to y'all. And as always, I'll catch you next time. Take it easy.